The girl was already running when the gate slammed behind her. She had a plastic bag in one hand and a folded photograph tucked inside her dress, pressed flat against her chest. Her name was Brielle. She was young. Her shoes had no laces, and one sole was beginning to peel away at the front, making a small flap that slapped the ground as she ran. She did not slow down. She could not afford to slow down. The market behind her was already filling with morning noise. Sellers calling out prices, motorcycles honking, women balancing trays on their heads. And if she did not find a good corner before the rush came, she would earn nothing today. Hello everyone, thank you for watching. Before we continue with this powerful story, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. We share amazing stories like this every week. Also, comment below and let us know where you are watching from. Are you in New York, South Africa, Canada, United Kingdom, anywhere in the world? We want to hear from you. Now let us continue with the story. She stopped at the junction near the big road, the junction where the cars came out of the estate. This was the best spot. This was where the rich ones passed. Brielle had learned this from watching for weeks. The people who drove out of that estate in the mornings were the kind of people who sometimes rolled down their windows. Sometimes they gave coins. Once a woman had given her a full bread roll still wrapped in paper. Brielle had eaten half and kept the other half for her mother. She always kept something for her mother. She pulled the photograph out from inside her dress and held it carefully by the edges the way her mother had taught her to hold important things. The photograph showed a woman lying in a hospital bed. The woman's face was thin and yellow-looking. Her eyes were half open like she was trying to stay awake but losing the fight. There were tubes near her arm. The blanket pulled up to her chest was not the hospital's own. It was the green and white blanket from their room, the one Brielle's mother had asked her to bring from home so she would feel less alone in that cold ward. Brielle's mother's name was Talia. She had been in that hospital for days. Brielle stood at the roadside and held the photograph up so passing drivers could see it. She did not shout. She had learned that shouting made her throat hurt and did not make more people stop. Instead, she stood still and held the photo at eye level, turning slightly whenever a car slowed near the gate. Some drivers looked straight ahead. Some looked at her and then looked away. A few slowed and rolled their windows down, and she would step forward and explain quickly, "My mother is sick. She is in Central Hospital. The bill is high. I have some." And most of them would nod and drive away, and some would give her a little money. And one man had given her a bit more, and she had cried the whole walk to the hospital. That was earlier in the week. It was now later in the week. Brielle had some money. She needed more. The hospital had been clear with her. The ward nurse, a woman called Nurse Elena, had told her plainly, "Your mother cannot be discharged without full payment, and the full payment had to come before the end of the following week, or the bed would go to someone else." Nurse Elena had said this without cruelty, just as a fact. The way you state a fact when you have stated it many times before and it has stopped feeling painful to say. Brielle had nodded and said yes, madam, and walked out and stood behind the hospital building and cried until her nose was running, and then she wiped her face and walked back to their room to sleep. And their room was one room in a compound house in Riverside District. 8 families lived in that compound. The room had a bed, a small gas stove, and a wooden box where her mother kept important papers. Since her mother had gone to the hospital, Brielle slept in the bed alone. It was too big for one person. She kept waking up, reaching sideways and finding nothing. The gate of the estate opened that morning. Brielle had been standing at the junction for a while. The first few cars came out fast, big black ones with tinted windows. They did not slow. Then a small silver car came driven by a woman in a yellow blouse who looked at the photograph and gave her a little money without asking any questions. Then a bus came full of workers in uniforms. They did not stop then, nothing for a while. Then a very large white car came slowly through the gate and stopped at the junction longer than usual, waiting for the road to clear. Brielle stepped forward. She held the photograph up. The window of the white car did not roll down. She could not see through the tinted glass. She stood there with the photograph raised, her arm beginning to ache. Then slowly the window came down about halfway. A man was driving. He was wearing a dark suit. He had a phone pressed to his ear, and he was speaking into it, not looking at her. His eyes were on the road ahead, waiting for a gap in traffic. Brielle stayed where she was. She had learned that if you moved away too quickly, they forgot you. The man on the phone said, "I told Vance already. The contract cannot be signed before the board approves the figures. Hey, tell him to wait." Then he looked sideways and finally saw her. His eyes went to her face first. then to the photograph she was holding up. He stopped talking mid-sentence. His mouth was still open, but no words came. He just stared at the photograph. Brielle noticed his hand, the one holding the phone, had dropped slowly to his lap. He was not speaking anymore. He was just looking at the photograph with an expression she did not understand. It was not pity, it was something else. Something she had never seen on a stranger's face before. The traffic cleared. The cars behind him began to honk. He did not move. He said very quietly, barely loud enough for her to hear through the half-open window, "Where did you get that?" He did not say it the way people sometimes ask rude questions. He said it the way someone asks when the answer might break them. Brielle did not fully understand the question. She stepped closer to the window. She said, "That is my mother. She is in the hospital. She is very sick." The man looked at her, then really looked at her, and his face changed again into something she still could not name. He pulled the car off the road onto the gravel at the side of the junction. He turned off the engine. The cars behind him passed one after another, honking as they went. The man stepped out of the car. He was tall. He had very short hair, and his suit was the kind that looked like it had never touched a hanger, like it had been made directly onto his body that morning. His shoes were clean in a way that did not make sense given the red dust of the road. He walked around the front of the car slowly, like someone walking towards something they were not sure they should approach. He stopped in front of Brielle and looked at the photograph again up close this time. His jaw tightened. "Can I hold it?" he asked. Brielle hesitated. The photograph was the most important thing she owned. If someone took it and drove away, she would have nothing. But this man had come out of his car, and he was standing in the road in his expensive suit, and he was asking her permission. She handed it to him. He took it with both hands and looked at it for a long time. A car honked from the road. He did not look up. When he finally looked up, his eyes were red at the edges. Not crying, not yet, but close to it. He said, "What is your mother's name?" "Talia," Brielle said. "Talia Hale." The man exhaled, a long, slow exhale like he had been holding his breath for years. He handed the photograph back to Brielle carefully. He said nothing for a moment, then he asked, "How old are you?" Brielle said, 11. He asked, "Where is your father?" Brielle said, "I don't have one." She said it simply without emotion. The way you say a thing you have accepted. The man looked at her face very carefully. The way people look at a thing when they are trying to read something written in a language they half know. His name was Ronan Hale. He was middle-aged. He was the CEO of a logistics company called Apex Logistics, which had offices in City Center, Harbor Town, and Port City. He had not thought about Talia Hale in many years, not in the way of choosing not to think about her, more in the way that people bury things, not because they want to forget, but because remembering is too heavy to carry while working and building and moving forward. He had told himself she was fine. He had told himself she had moved on. He had built that belief carefully, brick by brick, and it had held for years. But now a child was standing in front of him at a road junction holding a photograph, and everything he had built was coming apart. He said, "Come sit in the car. I will not drive anywhere. Just come and sit so we can talk properly." Brielle looked at the car. She looked at him. She had been told many times not to enter strangers' cars, but she had also been taught to read people. Her mother had taught her that. Watch their hands. Her mother had said if their hands are calm, mostly they mean well. This man's hands were not completely calm, but they were not threatening either. They were shaking slightly like someone standing in cold wind. She followed him to the car. He opened the back door for her, and she sat inside, and the smell hit her immediately. Clean leather and some kind of wood-scented air freshener, and underneath it, all the faint smell of cologne she did not know the name of. He sat in the driver's seat and turned to face her. He said, "That photograph, the woman in it, I knew her." Brielle looked at him. "You know my mother?" He said, "I knew her a long time ago." Brielle said, "Come from where?" The man said, "From university. We were friends." He said the word friends the way you say a word that is only partly true. Brielle was young, but she was not simple. She watched him say it. She said, "Friends like good friends." He looked out the windshield. He said, "Yes, we were very close." Brielle waited. There was more to it. She could tell. The story of how Ronan Hale had lost Talia Hale was not the kind of story people told at parties. It was the kind of story that lived in the chest, quiet and heavy, and came out only when something forced it. He had met Talia in their time at the University of the city. She was studying education. He was studying business. They had met in the library. She had been using the chair he thought was empty, and he had tried to move it, and she had looked up with such calm that he had apologized without meaning to. They had talked for hours that day. He had never talked to anyone for hours without noticing the time passing. They were together for a while. He had loved her in the way that young men love when they do not yet know that love requires decisions. In their final year, Ronan had been offered a fellowship in a distant city, a business scholarship fully funded, a pathway to a firm. His family had been very clear. You go. Opportunities like this do not come back. He had told himself he would send for Talia, that they would manage the distance, that he would return. He had told her all of this standing outside her hall of residence on an evening, and she had listened and said nothing. And he had thought her silence meant she understood. But when he arrived in the distant city, the calls became less frequent, the letters shorter. The city had its own gravity. It pulled at you, and you had to pull back very hard to stay connected to what you left behind. He pulled back for a time. Then he stopped pulling back. He told himself she had moved on. He found out later through a mutual friend that she had tried to reach him for months, that she had left messages with his cousin, that she had eventually stopped. He had carried that information for many years without examining it too closely. If you do not examine a wound, sometimes you can convince yourself it is healed. He had not known she was pregnant when he left. He had not known at all. He sat in the car at the road junction, with a young girl in the back seat, and he was doing arithmetic. The only arithmetic that mattered. And it was landing on him, the way a heavy thing lands when dropped from a height. Not all at once, in stages, first the weight, then the sound, then the full meaning of both. He turned to face Brielle again. He said very carefully, "Your mother? What is she sick with?" Brielle said, "The doctor said it is her liver. They said she needs medication and she needed an operation, but they could not do the operation until part of the bill was paid. They did the operation weeks ago. My aunt sold her sewing machine to help, but the remaining bill is high and I have some." She said this all in one breath, like she had rehearsed it many times, which she had. He listened to every word. He said, "And she is at Central Hospital." Brielle said yes. He said, "Is she awake? Is she talking?" Brielle said, "Some days she talks, some days she sleeps all day. Yesterday she recognized me. She said it like that was an achievement. Yesterday she recognized me." He closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, he reached into his jacket and took out his phone and called someone. He said, "Mia, cancel the meeting. Cancel the next one also. Tell Vance I will call him this afternoon." The person on the other end started to say something, and he said, "I know, and tell him I said this afternoon." He ended the call and turned back to Brielle. He said, "I'm going to take you to the hospital." Brielle stiffened. She said, "I don't know you." He nodded. He said, "That is correct. So we will do this. You call someone you trust. Tell them where you are going and with who. What is the number plate of this car? Then we will go." Brielle looked at him. This was not what strangers usually said. Strangers did not usually help you protect yourself from them. She took out her own phone, a cracked screen, the kind that cuts your thumb if you swipe in the wrong place, and called their neighbor, Aunt Clara. She told her the car color, the number plate she had read from outside, the name the man had given her. Aunt Clara said, "Brielle, do not go anywhere with a man you do not know." Brielle said, "He says he knows Mama." There was a pause. Aunt Clara said, "What is his name?" Brielle turned and said, "What is your full name?" The man said, "Ronan Hale." She told Aunt Clara. Another long pause. Aunt Clara said quietly, "Brielle, go." Brielle turned back to the man. She says, "Go," she said. He started the car. They drove toward Central Teaching Hospital in silence for the first few minutes. Then Brielle said from the back seat, "How do you know, Aunt Clara?" The man said he did not know her. Brielle said, "Then why did she say to go with you when I told her your name?" The man was quiet for a moment. He said, "Maybe your mother told her about me." Brielle considered this. Then she said, "My mother does not talk about my father." He kept his eyes on the road. He did not respond to that directly. He said, "Tell me about her, how she has been, what she likes, what she says." And Brielle, who had not been asked this by anyone, began to talk. She talked about how her mother woke up early, even on weekends, because she said sleeping late was a kind of waste. She talked about how her mother made groundnut soup the way no one else made it, thin but so full of flavor that she wanted to drink it after the food was done. She talked about how her mother sang, while ironing, always the same two songs, and how she always apologized to Brielle after she was harsh with her, always that same night before sleep. "I was too sharp today, forgive me." She talked about how her mother had been a teacher before the school reduced their staff and she had to start sewing to earn, and how even then she brought home books and quizzed Brielle on them every evening. Brielle talked for minutes straight. The man drove and listened and did not once look at his phone. When they arrived at the hospital, the parking attendant recognized the car and waved them into the reserve section near the entrance. Brielle noticed this. "Do you come here often?" she asked. He said, "I am on the hospital board." She didn't fully understand what that meant, but it clearly meant something because when they entered the main building, a woman at the reception desk looked up and said, "Good morning, Mr. Hale." And he nodded and said, "Which ward is Talia Hale in?" And the woman checked quickly and said, "Female Medical Ward 3, Bed 11. And he thanked her, and they walked. Brielle walked ahead of him because she knew the way. She knew exactly where to turn, as she knew which corridor smelled of antiseptic more than the others, and which floor tile was cracked and might catch your foot if you were not careful. She had walked this route every day for days. She could walk it blind. As they approached Ward 3, she slowed. She always slowed at the door because she was always slightly afraid of what she might find on the other side. Some days she had come and found her mother awake and sitting up, and that was good. Some days she had found her so still and grey-looking that Brielle's heart had stuttered. She never knew which day it would be until she opened the door. She pushed the door open. Ward 3 had 8 beds, 5 were occupied. The smell was the same antiseptic and something beneath it, something human and private. Bed 11 was at the far end. There was a curtain pulled halfway around it. Brielle could see her mother's feet at the end of the bed, still wrapped in the socks Brielle had brought recently. She walked toward the bed. Behind her she heard the man's footsteps slow. She pulled back the curtain. Her mother was awake. Her eyes were open and looking at the ceiling. When she heard the curtain move, she turned her head. She saw Brielle first, and her face softened immediately. Then she saw the man standing behind Brielle, and her face changed in a way that Brielle had never seen before. Her mother's face did not just change, it collapsed. Not in pain, in something older than pain. The kind of change that happens when your body recognizes something before your mind does. Her mother said very quietly, barely above a whisper, "Ronan." She said it. The way you say the name of something you had stopped expecting. Not angry, not joyful, just recognizing like a word in a language you thought you had forgotten, rising suddenly from somewhere you did not know it was stored. Brielle looked between them. She looked at the man. She looked at her mother. She said, "Mama, who is he?" Her mother closed her eyes. She opened them again, slowly. She looked at Brielle with an expression that carried so many things at once that Brielle could not read any of them clearly. Her mother said, "Come here." Brielle came to the side of the bed. Her mother took her hand. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "He is someone I knew before you were born." Brielle said, "He said the same thing." Her mother turned to look at the man again. He was standing at the foot of the bed with his hands at his sides, absolutely still. He said, "Talia." Her mother said, "How did you find me?" He said, "I did not find you. Your daughter found me at the road junction near the upscale estate gate." Her mother looked at Brielle. "You were at the gate again?" Brielle said, "Yes." Her mother said, "I told you not to go near the main road." Brielle said, "You also said the hospital bill needs paying." Her mother was quiet. Then slowly something like a tired smile crossed her face. The smile of a woman who has been outmaneuvered by her own child and found it, despite everything, a little bit funny. Ronan took the chair beside the bed without being invited and sat down. He said, "How long have you been here?" Her mother said, "Days." He said, "And before that, where were you living?" She told him, "The compound house in Riverside District. Before that, Oakwood. Before that, a brief time in Brookfield after her mother died and she had gone to bury her. Ronan listened. He did not interrupt. He did not look at his phone even once. When she was done, he said, "And Brielle's father." And Talia said simply and clearly, "You are looking at her." The ward was very quiet for a moment. A nurse walked past the open curtain and did not notice them. Outside the window, the sound of the city continued. Motorbikes, a vendor calling, the distant honk of traffic. None of it touched that small space around bed 11. Ronan sat with the information settling into him the way sediment settles in still water, slowly layer by layer, until the water that was once cloudy becomes clear and you can see all the way to the bottom. And he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" Talia turned her head away toward the wall. She said, "I tried. Your cousin said you were too busy. Your distant number rang and rang. I wrote 2 letters. I don't know if they arrived." Ronan said, "I never got letters." She said, "I know. At some point I stopped expecting answers." He said, "I should have come back." She turned to look at him again. She said with no particular anger, just honesty, "Yes, you should have." Brielle was standing at the foot of the bed watching all of this. She was processing it the way young children process enormous things, in pieces, one at a time, not looking at the whole picture yet. She had understood that this man knew her mother. She had understood that the knowing had been close. And she had almost understood the rest, but was keeping that last piece at arm's length for now, because once you understand something fully, you cannot ununderstand it. She stood there and watched and kept her face very still. Ronan stood up. He said, "I'm going to settle the bill, all of it, today." Talia said, "Ronan," he said, "please let me." There was a firmness to it that was also a kind of pleading. She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded once. He turned to Brielle. He said, "Will you come with me to the billing office?" Brielle looked at her mother. Her mother gave a very small nod. Brielle went with him. The billing office was on the ground floor. It smelled of paper and printer ink. A man in a short-sleeved shirt was sitting behind the counter tapping at a keyboard. Ronan gave him Talia's name, and the man typed and looked at his screen and said the amount outstanding was high. Ronan reached into his jacket and produced a card and paid it, just like that. The amount which had taken Brielle days of standing at road junctions holding a photograph paid in seconds, the receipt printed. The man stamped something. Brielle watched the paper come out of the printer and thought about all the mornings she had stood in the sun and all the cars that had not stopped. She did not feel angry about it. She felt something that was harder to name, like the difference between climbing a hill slowly and reaching the top and realizing a car could have taken you there, and being glad you're at the top, but also feeling the weight of every step. She took the receipt and held it with both hands. Ronan watched her hold it. He said quietly, "I'm sorry it took this long." She looked up at him. She said, "Are you apologizing to me or to Mama?" He said, "Both." She folded the receipt carefully and put it in her plastic bag next to the photograph. When they returned to the ward, a different nurse was at bed 11 checking Talia's chart. The nurse looked up and said the doctor would come in the afternoon, and that if the remaining blood work looked good, Talia could possibly be cleared for discharge by end of the following week. Talia thanked her. When the nurse left, the 3 of them were alone again. Talia looked at Ronan. He looked back at her. Brielle sat in the chair and unpacked her plastic bag and took out a small container of porridge she had made that morning and placed it on the bedside table. She did everything carefully and quietly, as if trying to take up as little space as possible. Ronan said, "I want to be involved in everything if you will allow it." Talia said, "You cannot come back into a life and pick up from where you stopped." He said, "I know." She said, "There are years you are not here. You do not get to skip over those." He said, "I am not asking to skip over them. I am asking to start from now." Talia was quiet. She looked at Brielle, who was opening the container of porridge and pretending to be very focused on the lid. Talia said, "Brielle has a right to decide what she wants. I will not make that decision for her." Brielle looked up. She put the porridge on the table. She said, "What would start from now even look like?" It was a serious question, asked seriously. The way only children can ask serious questions with no softening, no social cushion, just the raw form of the thing that needs answering. Ronan sat back down in the chair. He thought for a real moment before speaking. He said, "I do not know exactly, but I would like to learn your name properly. I would like to know what you like and what you hate. I would like to make sure your mother is cared for. I would like to be honest with you about who I am and what I failed to do so you can decide from real information, not from something I polished up to seem better than it was." Brielle looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "Do you like groundnut soup?" He blinked. He said, "Yes." She said, "Mama makes the best one. When she is better, she will make it and you can try it." She said it like a test, like she was placing a small condition on the future, to see if he would accept the terms. He said, "I would like that very much." Talia was watching all of this from the bed with her thin hands folded on the blanket, the green and white blanket from their room, and her eyes were not crying, but they were the eyes of someone who had been carrying something alone for years and had just felt the first other hand reach for the handle. Ronan stayed at the hospital for more hours. He spoke with the doctor when he came. He asked questions, real specific questions about the treatment plan and the medication and what Talia would need in the weeks after discharge. The doctor answered carefully, a little surprised to be asked such specific questions by a well-dressed man who had appeared without warning. When the doctor left, Ronan made a call to someone he knew at a pharmacy and arranged for the post-discharge medication to be delivered directly to wherever Talia would be staying. He did all of this quietly, without announcing what he was doing, which Brielle noticed and privately approved of. At noon, Brielle left to go and buy food from the woman who sold near the hospital gate. She brought back enough for 3 people. They ate together in the ward. Ronan in the chair, Brielle sitting cross-legged on the end of the bed near her mother's feet. Talia propped up slightly against her pillow. It was a strange lunch. It was also somehow the least strange part of the whole day. Eating together is one of those things that makes even complicated situations briefly simple. Before he left that afternoon, Ronan took Brielle aside in the corridor. He said, "I know this is all very sudden for you." She said, "I am fine." He said, "You can be not fine. It is allowed." She looked at him. She said, "My mother taught me that feelings wait. You feel them later when the urgent things are done." He said, "Your mother is very wise." Brielle said, "I know." He reached into his pocket and took out a piece of paper on which he had written his number. He handed it to her. He said, "If anything happens, anything, call me day or night." She took it. She looked at it. She folded it and put it next to the receipt. He left. She went back into the ward. Her mother was looking at the ceiling again, but differently from before, not the empty looking of pain, more the full looking of thought. Brielle climbed up onto the foot of the bed and sat with her legs pulled in. She said, "Mama." Her mother said, "Yes." Brielle said, "Is he really my father?" A long pause. Then her mother said, "Yes." Brielle nodded slowly. She said, "Okay." She picked up the porridge and handed it to her mother. Her mother took it. They sat in silence while Talia ate, and the afternoon light came through the window of Ward 3 and lay across the green and white blanket in a long, pale rectangle. In the days that followed, Ronan came back. Not every day. He was careful not to come every day because he understood that showing up too much too fast was its own kind of pressure. He came on the weekend and brought fruit. He came during the week and spoke with the discharge team. Later he came and sat with Brielle in the hospital corridor while Talia slept, and he asked her about school, and she told him she had not been attending for the past month because she had been needed at the hospital and also because there had not been money for transport. He did not say anything dramatic when she said this. He just listened and nodded and wrote something in his phone. The following week, Talia was discharged. The medication arrived at Aunt Clara's house, which was where they decided Talia should stay during recovery because their own room was up flights of stairs. Aunt Clara had been told the full story by now. She said very little about it except once standing in her kitchen while the soup was on. He should have come back. Then she stirred the pot and said nothing more, which was the wisest response available. Brielle went back to school the week after. Ronan had spoken with the school without making a big production of it. The transport was arranged. The fees for the term were settled. On her first day back, her teacher asked where she had been, and she said, "My mother was sick." Her teacher said, "Is she better now?" Brielle said, "Getting better." Her teacher nodded and moved on. At break time, Brielle sat under the acacia tree at the edge of the school compound and took out the folded photograph from her bag. She still carried it out of habit and looked at it. Her mother in the hospital bed, thin and yellow, the green and white blanket pulled up. She looked at it for a long time. Then she folded it carefully and put it back. Ronan did not move fast. He moved the way someone moves who knows they are making up for lost time, but also knows that rushing is not the same as recovering. He came on weekends. He brought small things, not expensive, not showy. Paw, because Talia had mentioned once in the hospital that she liked Paw. A notebook for Brielle because she had told him she liked writing things down. Once he came and fixed the door of Aunt Clara's spare room that had been sticking for months, and Aunt Clara watched him do it from the doorway and then brought him a cold Fanta without saying a word. One afternoon after the discharge, Talia sat on Aunt Clara's veranda in the sun with a shawl around her shoulders and Brielle on the step below her, and Ronan in a chair he had carried from inside. They were not talking about anything important. Brielle was describing something that had happened at school. A boy who had accidentally sat on his own lunch and tried to deny it, and both adults were laughing, Talia's laugh catching halfway through because laughing still pulled at something in her side where the operation had been, and Brielle watching her mother's face carefully every time she laughed to make sure the pain was not too much. This was what Brielle did now. She watched, she calculated, she made small adjustments. Ronan watched Brielle watch her mother, and something moved in him. He thought, this child has been running for months before the hospital, probably before that. She had been running some version of this race for years, carrying things children should not carry. Doing a quiet kind of management that looked from the outside like a child just being a child, but was actually something much harder. He made a decision sitting there on the veranda that he would not announce. He would simply begin doing it. By then, Talia was strong enough to walk to the end of the street and back without stopping. Brielle walked with her every evening. Sometimes Ronan joined them. They would walk the street slowly, the three of them in a line with Talia in the middle, and the neighbors would see them, and some would greet, and some would look and say nothing, and some would ask Aunt Clara later who the man was, and Aunt Clara would say, an old friend, which was not a lie, and was also not the whole truth, and satisfied nobody, which was probably the point. One evening later asked him directly, are you going to live with us? They were sitting on the veranda again, Talia inside resting. Ronan said that is a decision for your mother to make and for you. Brielle said, but what do you want? He thought about it honestly. He said, I want to be close. I want to know you. I want your mother to be well. Beyond that, I will follow whatever makes things right, not whatever is easiest for me. Brielle considered this. She said that is a careful answer. He said it is an honest one. She said, yes, I know. Talia recovered slowly and then all at once, the way recovery sometimes works. There was a week where nothing seemed to improve, and then suddenly she was sitting upright easily, eating full portions, sleeping through the night without waking in pain. Her color came back, not the color from the photograph, not that thin yellow, but her real color, the warm brown of her face when she was well. Brielle noticed the morning it returned. She didn't say anything about it. She just looked at her mother's face across the breakfast table and felt something in her chest unknot. In the month after the discharge, Talia began to talk seriously with Ronan about what came next. They talked in the evenings after Brielle was in bed, though Brielle was often not fully asleep and heard more than she was supposed to. They talked about the compound room in Riverside district. They talked about schooling. They talked about Ronan's life, his work, his apartment in the upscale neighborhood, the fact that he had never married. They talked about what honesty looked like when you are building something between two people who had been separated for over a decade. These were not easy conversations. Some evenings Brielle heard raised voices and then long silences. Some evenings there was quiet laughter. She tracked the ratio carefully. One afternoon Ronan brought Brielle to his office, not to show her around. He brought her because she had asked to see where he worked. The way children ask to see the places that adults disappear to. Apex Logistics was on the third floor of a building in the airport residential area. It had glass walls and a long meeting table and framed maps on the wall with routes marked in red lines between cities. Brielle walked around looking at everything. She stopped in front of a large map. She said, do your trucks go to all these places? He said, yes. She said, how do they know which road to take? He said, we plan the routes. We study the roads. We know which ones are safe. She looked at the map for a long time. She said, what happens when there is no road? He said, then you build one or you find another way. She turned from the map. She said, is that what you're doing with us? Finding another way because you missed the road? He looked at her, young and standing in front of a map and asking the question that no adult had managed to put that cleanly. He said, yes, exactly that. She nodded. She seemed satisfied. She walked to his desk and sat in his chair and spun it once, the way children do when given access to something that spins. He watched her and said nothing. Outside the glass walls of his office, his staff were pretending to work, while very obviously watching the small girl spinning in the boss's chair. There was one more thing that happened months after the day at the junction that matters. Brielle was going through the wooden box in their room. They had returned to the compound room by then. Talia well enough, the stairs manageable, and at the bottom of the box, under the important papers, she found a thick envelope that had never been opened. It had been opened and resealed badly so that the gum didn't quite hold. Inside were 2 letters, handwritten, folded in thirds. The handwriting was unfamiliar. She looked at the return address on the envelope. A distant address. The date on the older letter was from years ago. She brought the envelope to her mother. Talia looked at it for a long time without taking it. Then she took it. She looked at the distant address. She said very quietly, "His cousin gave me this. He found it in a bag of Ronan's things that had been sent back from the distant city. He thought I would want it." Brielle said, "Did you read them?" Her mother said, "A long time ago." Brielle said, "What did they say?" Talia refolded the envelope. She said, "He asked after me. He said he was sorry the calls had not connected. He said he was going to come home for the holidays and wanted to see me." Brielle was quiet, she said, "But he didn't come." Her mother said no, he didn't. The letters arrived after the holidays. By then, I had already stopped waiting. Brielle held this information. She held it the way you hold something breakable when you're not sure what to do with it. That evening, she called Ronan. She told him about the letters. She did not ask a question, she just told him. He was quiet for a long time on the other end of the phone. Then he said, "I did send letters. I didn't know why they never arrived." Brielle said, "They arrived just late, and by then she stopped." He said, "By then your mother had moved on." She said, "By then she had to." Another silence. He said, "Thank you for telling me." She said, "I thought you should know." She said goodnight and ended the call and sat with the phone in her hand and thought about all the ways things can go wrong between people who are not trying to hurt each other. Just the wrong timing, the wrong cousin, the wrong bag, the letters that arrived after the holidays. Months after the day at the junction, Talia returned to teaching. A primary school near their compound needed a part-time teacher for lower primary. She started on a morning dressed in the good blouse Aunt Clara had pressed for her with a new pen in her bag that Brielle had bought with her own small savings from a school competition prize. Brielle walked her to the school gate that first morning and stood there until her mother disappeared through the door. Then she turned and walked to her own school in the opposite direction, and her stride was different. Anyone watching would have seen it. Not heavier, lighter. The stride of someone who has put something down. There are things this story cannot resolve cleanly. Years are not recovered in months. Trust is not rebuilt in a season. Ronan and Talia spoke carefully with each other, sometimes warmly, and sometimes with a distance that neither of them closed deliberately, but that both of them understood. Brielle watched this and catalogued it. She was a child who catalogued things. She did not press them. She had her own relationship with Ronan now. Cautious, curious, growing slowly from the outside in rather than the inside out. She called him by his name. She had not yet called him anything else. He had not asked her to. One evening at the end of the month, the 3 of them were at Aunt Clara's for dinner because Aunt Clara had made groundnut soup and had called them all. Talia made the soup with Aunt Clara. Side by side in the kitchen, the 2 of them working in the practiced silence of people who have cooked together for years. Ronan sat in the living room with Brielle, who was showing him something in her school notebook, a short story she had written for class. He read it slowly. The story was about a girl who finds a road that everyone else has missed and follows it somewhere good. He read it twice, then he gave it back without saying anything dramatic. Because sometimes saying nothing is the right response to a thing that says everything. They ate the soup that evening at Aunt Clara's table, the 4 of them. Ronan had 1 bowl and then looked up and said with complete sincerity, "This is the best groundnut soup I have ever eaten." Aunt Clara pointed at Talia without hesitation. "She made the base. I only added the fish." Talia shook her head. "She is lying. I added the fish." Aunt Clara said, "You added the fish wrong." Talia said, "There is no wrong way to add fish." Aunt Clara said, "Child, I'm old and I'm telling you there is." Brielle laughed. Ronan laughed. Talia laughed and held her side. Aunt Clara did not laugh, but her face had the expression of someone who does not laugh out loud, but laughs inside very loudly. This is what the story comes down to at the end. A girl who carried a photograph until it found the right pair of eyes. Not a miracle, not luck exactly, more like the particular result of refusing to stop. She had stood at the junction for days, and on the next day, the right car had come out of the gate. Everything after that had required people to make choices, hard ones, honest ones, the kind that cost something. Her mother had chosen to let someone in. Ronan had chosen to stay present even when it was uncomfortable. Brielle herself had chosen to ask questions rather than make assumptions and to take things piece by piece rather than all at once. These are not extraordinary choices, but most of the good things that happen in this world come from ordinary people making ordinary choices with real intention. If there is a lesson in it, it is not dramatic. It is simply this: do not throw away the photograph. Keep walking to the junction. Stand still long enough. The world is full of people moving fast, in expensive cars, who have forgotten what they left behind. And sometimes all it takes is one small hand holding one important thing at the right moment to stop them long enough to remember. If this story moved you, leave a comment below and tell us what would you have done in Brielle's place. And if you are new here, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this waiting for